Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. A few years ago, my husband had to go out of state for a business trip for about a week. We had twins that were about 18 months at that time, and they were our first kids, so it took a lot out of the both of us. Previously, I would just go with him on his trips, but it becomes a lot harder with children, so we agreed that it was best that I stayed home. For work, I actually helped a friend with her small business of house cleaning, so I worked when I wanted, which made it easier for me to be able to stay home with my boys. However, I also get anxious about being home alone. I lived in some very bad places as a kid, so I constantly feared that someone would break in while I was home alone and that something bad would happen to me. That unfortunately followed me as I got older, and now I don't like being alone for more than a night. While he was gone though, my mom invited me over to her place for the week, so that way she could help me with my boys and also spend time with them, and that I would also have someone to talk to. The only thing was that she lived about 4 hours away, so I would be making a mini road trip with my 2 boys and my little dog. The first night alone was not pleasant at all. I put our air mattress in our boys' room, so I wasn't alone and slept there. Those things are not comfortable for more than a few hours. With little sleep that day, I went about our daily routine of making breakfast, went to the doctor's appointment, picked up some groceries and a prescription, and then went to see a friend as to have less time alone. I will mention that the part about going to my mom's was very last minute and not planned out. Later that evening when we got back home, I was making something for dinner when my mom had called. As we were talking and I was telling her about my concerns, she offered to have me come stay the rest of the week. I had plans to go out there first thing tomorrow morning, but I figured that it wasn't too late being around 6 or so. And after eating, I called my mom to let her know that I would head out there tonight. The anxiety in me thought that 4 hours alone tonight was much better than 6 more whole days, so off to packing I went. I got a few outfits for myself and the kids, since I would be able to do laundry there, and I got the car all packed up with our stuff, and then the dog, and then the twins. The one thing that I failed to realize was that while it was only 6 when I started, we ended up not leaving till a little after 7. I also did not sleep too well that night, so I knew that I was going to need more caffeine. After picking up some coffee, we were on the road. We were probably about 2 hours in, or close to that, when I had to stop to use the restroom and grab something to snack on to keep me awake. I remember coming up to this gas station that had a small bar and grill attached to it, so I felt comfortable knowing that there were going to be people around. I let the dog out first while I stood next to the car. Then after putting the dog back in, I pulled the boys out, locked the door, and then I headed inside. There were a few rowdy people on the other side though, most likely drinking, so it was pretty loud. Random laughing here, yelling and clapping, echoed into the little gas station. After I checked out, I started getting the boys buckled in. I find it easier to carry one in one sling while carrying the other in the car seat. That way, I have at least one free hand. So I sit Evan down on the seat while I put Ian back in his. I have a little hatchback, so I find it easier to walk around on the other side rather than reaching over them. As I went over to buckle Ian in, I heard the music from the bar get louder as someone opened the door. Out came 2 people, a man and a woman arguing very loudly. I can't remember what about, but they were loud enough to make me look over. I continue buckling him in and then go around the other side to get Evan strapped back in. And from there, I hear them yelling again, and I look back over to see her punching him in the chest. I finished getting them secured, and I did a fast walk over to the driver's door and got in. But before I continued, I decided to text my mom and husband to let them know how much longer I had. While I was doing this, I started hearing more yelling, but this time it was things like, "Let go of me!" Thinking that it was the same couple, I looked up to see that they were not within my view. I chalked it up to them moving away and that it was none of my business, and I started to set my phone back up with a GPS so I could head out. As I start to pull out of the parking lot, I'm startled by my passenger door opening as a woman is screaming help and then jumping in my car. She quickly locks the door and starts screaming at me, "Go," and then crying. I didn't know what to do at first, and I screamed something back that I probably shouldn't have, but then I took off. The gas station was right off the highway, so it didn't take long to get back on. I didn't know what to do, so I just drove while this woman, who I didn't know, sobbed in the seat next to me and screamed every once in a while. My boys are wide awake at this point, also on the verge of tears, so I tried comforting them the best that I could. I don't think this woman realized that I had kids in the car by the way that she looked back at them. She apologized and then explained that this guy that she had just met was trying to force her into his truck and that she was screaming to let go. It was not the couple that I saw earlier. She said that I could drop her off at the next exit and that she would find someone from there. But as I got over to the exit, there was a black and yellow truck sitting at the intersection with their lights off. Unfortunately, I didn't know who this person was or what they were doing until the girl started screaming that it's him. Not knowing what else to do, I blew the yellow light and then went straight back onto the highway. I know it was stupid, but I thought that at least if a cop saw it and stopped us, he would keep going. This guy quickly did a burnout to follow us as well. Noticing he was behind us, the girl starts screaming and crying more, now making my kids cry. I was more terrified at that moment than I was being home alone, and now I regretted leaving. Not knowing what to do and on the verge of tears myself, I tried telling the girl to calm down as she was upsetting the kids. When I saw this guy get right on my ass and flash his lights, I was now in tears, thinking that this is how my life was going to end. When we started coming up to an accident, there were lights everywhere. The far left lane was blocked, and I knew this was our chance. I quickly shot over the two lanes, honking and holding down my horn, and I swerved over to the shoulder. I have never seen a cop run up to a car faster. We're all inconsolable and trying to explain what happened when the cop had us get out of the car. And once a little calmer, we explained that the truck was following us and was trying to kidnap her. He got as much info as possible and put it in bolo for it. After getting more information, the cop offered to take the girl home and to follow me for a bit to see if the truck showed up again. I called my mom and husband first to calm me, the boys, and the dog down a bit, and then agreed to have the cop follow me for a few minutes as a peace of mind. The woman hugged me so hard and thanked me for not shoving her out of the car, and also apologized for putting us in danger. I know it was terrifying, but I was also glad that I was there for her because who knows what could have happened. We drove a few miles with no issue, so he had me pull over again and let me know that I would be on my own again. At this point, I was wide awake and just ready to go to my mom's to crash. The last hour to hour and a half or so seemed to fly by, and after arriving, I quickly crashed. I hope they ended up finding that guy because that could have ended a lot worse, and I'm thankful that the police were where they were at that time to save us from something worse. Unfortunately, now I have a slight fear of driving at night. The story took place back when I was in college. I had a lot of friends that liked to party, and while I wasn't the type that liked to drink or do stupid things, I was the type to make sure that my friends got to and from the party responsibly. Basically, I was their designated driver. I would drive them to the parties, sit around, and then drink soda until they were drunk off their asses, and then I would drive them back home. It may sound like an incredibly boring way to spend your college years, but I honestly had a lot of fun with it. I'm not an incredibly social person myself, so just kind of sitting around and watching people make themselves look like idiots was my idea of a fun Friday night. This situation occurred at one party that was particularly rowdy and had a lot of people that I didn't know, which usually happens when the parties were off campus. I was there, I was sitting in the corner with my Dr. Pepper in hand, and I was talking with another girl that was completely trashed. She and I were having a conversation about my education, something that she seemed way more interested in that than she should have been. When one of my friends comes over to ask me if I can take one of his friends home, they were insistent that it was just down the street. I usually don't play designated driver with people that I don't know personally, but I also didn't want this guy struggling to get home if he needed a ride. I reluctantly agreed and said that as long as my friend was vouching for him and that it wasn't too far from the party, then I would take him home. I got up, followed him out to the front door, and he shouted to some guy named Greg, telling him that I would be taking him home. They said their drunken goodbyes, and I walked over to my car, which I should add was a late 90s Dodge Caravan. After they were done talking and telling each other how much they would miss each other, Greg walked over and smiled at me, asking if this was the car. I nodded, said yes, told him that this was the one, and then got in the driver's seat. He, for some reason, opened the sliding door and then hopped into one of the back seats. I was curious, but if there's one thing you don't ask a drunk person you're taking home, it's why they chose to do mundane things. He gets buckled in and I pulled onto the road. I then ask him where he's headed. He tells me an address that's about 5 blocks down the way, literally a straight shot and only a few minutes away. And as drunken people often do, he starts rambling about random things. He tells me that his name was Gregory and that he was named after his grandfather. He tells me about a dog that he used to have as a child named Bucky and how much he missed him. He then tells me about his sister and how she runs a beauty salon in New Mexico and how he and his mother never really got along. This guy is seriously telling me his life story within the span of 1.5 miles. I then pull up to where he wanted to go and I let him know that we were at his house, just in case he didn't realize it yet. And he just kind of sits there and stares at nothing. After a few seconds of really awkward silence, he literally starts to cry. Out of nowhere, he tells me that he's sorry. I have no idea why he's sorry, and I tell him that he doesn't need to be. And after sobbing for a few moments, he tells me that I was the nicest person that he has met, and that he was going to miss all of this. Once again, I'm just sitting here silently, and he's telling me how much he's going to miss everything out here. He then tells me why he's going to miss it, he drops in with, "Ah, I'm about to go to prison for a really, really long time." I just kind of sat there and nodded, and he, of course, continues, "I made a mistake. I accidentally assaulted my ex-girlfriend, so I have to go to court tomorrow, and I'm going to go away for a long, long time." And as he finished telling me about what he did to her, he starts to chuckle and stare at me in the rearview mirror. He smiles and tells me that I kind of remind him of his ex and that he hated her. And after a few more moments, he shrugs and tells me that he appreciated the ride and that we should go get lunch when he gets out of prison. I just agreed and nodded along until he got out and got to his door. And as soon as he entered his house, I let out a huge sigh of relief. The entire time he was staring at me and telling me about what he's done, I felt like I was holding my breath. This was the last time that I give anyone a ride that wasn't one of my immediate friends. And I hope that I literally never meet Gregory ever again. This seems like the right place to tell this story. It happened back in 2013. It was about 8 to 9 o'clock, and I was on my way home from a pal's. I was sat upstairs at the back of the bus. There was only me and one other person on the top floor of the bus, and he was sat near the front on the opposite side. When I got up to get off the bus and walk from the back towards the stairs, he called me. I don't remember exactly how he asked, but he was asking for a lighter. I walked up to him, going through my pockets, and I told him that I had matches, and I handed them to him. He took them off of me and just stared at them for a good few seconds, and then handed them back to me and said something along the line of, "Don't worry." The time it took for him to decide to not use them felt very strange to me, and the eye contact before and after just felt intense. I walked down the stairs thinking, what the hell was up with that? And then I got off the bus. I told a couple of people how weird it felt and described what he was wearing, a zip-up black hoodie with a knockoff Hardy-style tiger on the chest. Well, fast forward about a week, and there's a fatal stabbing on my bus in my city. A young girl on her way to school was stabbed to death on the top of the deck of a bus. Stabbings are pretty common in my city, but a young girl being killed on her way to school, well, that's big news anywhere. They show a photo of the suspect being arrested, but you can only see the back of his hoodie. And straight away, I think that's the same exact Ed Hardy knockoff, and I start wondering if it's the guy that I had seen. When they released more photos of him from the front, I knew that it was him. The scary thing is, it transpired that he had recently been let out of a mental health facility. He hadn't been given any support and had been sleeping rough on buses. I've had many interactions with mentally ill people and some dangerous individuals, but this is the one that stays with me. Even though the interaction wasn't much, it felt so strange. I always wonder if he was seeing how I reacted when he asked me, hence why he didn't use the matches. Who knows? It's just a sad story, really. Rest in peace to the poor girl who was murdered. Her name was Christina Edkins, and she was 16 years old. Me and a couple of friends like to go urban exploring. It started out when we were kids. There was a house down the street that had been condemned after the old lady that lived in it passed away. Me and my friends, Andre and Stacy, who lived on the same street as me, talked about going in there and looking around. So, one night, we agreed to take a look and we found a few treasures and then safely left. But from there, it definitely sparked our interest in future explorations. This made up most of our summers. We would find other small houses, shacks, or even old buildings that may have been abandoned or gutted after a fire or something. I bring this up because it's ultimately what led us to these following events. After graduation, Stacy moved out of state for a job offer, while Andre and I still live close by. Keeping in touch with us, Stacy always called us to talk about the life where she lived and that we needed to come check out her new place. She always knew what to say though to really tie us in. She said that she was purposely looking for places for us to explore, and then she found out that there was a really old school that has been closed for decades about 2 hours from her. After she sent us some pictures from when she passed by it and then looked up the directions, we were convinced. So a few months away from summer, we started making our arrangements to head out there. With summer vacation starting, Andre and I drove out to her place, preparing to be there for about a week or so. Upon arriving, Stacy greeted us and then got Andre set up in the spare bedroom, and I offered to take the couch. That night, we caught up over dinner and she started showing us more pictures that she had taken from the outside. She wanted to go in, but she decided to wait till she had us with her because she knew that we'd be interested. The school sat in the middle of an overgrown field, and from the satellite map, it looked like there was a small shed or house a few yards away. There was a fence surrounding it, so we were definitely going to be trespassing. So this should be the part where I say we shouldn't do this, that it was a stupid idea, and that we should only go to places open to the public. But I didn't. We basically brainstormed what old tools and equipment that we wanted to bring with us, packed everything up, and then settled in for the night. The next evening, we headed out to the location. We wanted to go later on so there would be less traffic around and hopefully less people likely to report us. We took Stacy's car since it had local tags, and then we parked it off the side of a gravel road next to the property. The fencing wasn't anything fancy, just chicken wire basically secured to post. There wasn't even barbed wire above it, so we bent the top of the wire down, hopped over, and then proceeded to the entrance. The door was barely a door. It was only on the top hinges, and the bottom part looked like it had been crumbling away. There was a big piece of thin wood in front of it, but it was only nailed to the top, so you could easily bend it up to slide under it. This was our way in, and upon entering, you could tell that the air was stagnant. You could smell mild to old wood, and maybe even that smell of decay, like the smell a lot of old buildings start having. If you do this or start doing it, you'll recognize that smell. Most, if not all of the windows were boarded up, so you could just see the light of the sunset peeking in the cracks. We put on our mask because you never know what you could be breathing in, and then we grabbed our flashlights and headlamps and started figuring out where to start. There were 2 floors and 1 set of stairs to the right from what we could tell. We started on the first floor, of course. We walked to the left to see 2 classrooms on one side and the gym and cafeteria on the other. We entered the first classroom. Most of the desks were still in their place. There was a bookshelf in the corner with some heavily damaged books, and old toys on it. The pages in the book were all stuck together, most likely due to water damage, as the window right above it was broken out and poorly boarded up. There was still string hanging above the chalkboard for like a party or banner of some sort. It was interesting to look at, and even though we didn't go to the school, it still brought back some good memories from those times. As we were looking around, we started hearing a scuffling sound coming from above us. Now, this isn't our first time, as mentioned. We've made rules for ourselves that if we ever run into trouble such as cops, animals, or other people, a lot of places are bound to have animals living in them. Not a lot of people are going to bother going in there, so they don't have to worry about danger. You just have to give them their space for the most part. You may run into squatters, and as long as they're not violent, you can usually just walk out without much interaction. Well, as for police, if there are trespassing signs, then you know the risk you're taking. We've only run into them twice. Once as a teenager, and they just escorted us home. And the second time, they suggested that we leave due to the structure not being safe. And with that being said, we just go quiet for a second to see if we heard anything else, or some talking maybe, accompanying the sound. We heard nothing, so we assumed it to be an animal and then just moved on. We walked over to the gym to see what we could find. There was a basket in the back with some deflated dodgeballs covered in a blanket of dust. Stacy found an old doll that she ended up putting in her bag to take home. She said that it reminded her of an old doll her mom, or maybe her grandmother had, but to me, it was just creepy looking. As we continued to look around, we heard more shuffling upstairs and then paused. This time, we heard what sounded like a really weird meow. Andrew made a comment about that not sounding like a cat, while Stacy argued that it was. It sounded enough like a meow to me at that time though. We then made our way over by the stairs, where there also appeared to be an office for maybe a principal or a nurse's office and a faculty room. It was starting to get a little darker, so we decided to head upstairs before it was too dark, so we could check out what was up there, and then we could make our way back down to the offices. As we headed up, we could hear more noise, and now it sounded like it was coming from one of the back classes. Stacy was interested in finding the cat, while Andre was hesitant. He had a point that we did have to be cautious in case it had rabies or was just aggressive, so we at least convinced Stacy to hold back some. We went into one of the rooms closest to the stairs when we started hearing some whimpering, like a small puppy, but this one, it definitely didn't sound right. Stacy and Andre agreed, but Stacy thought maybe the dog was just ill or scared. And after a little back and forth, we opted to check what the sound was coming from so we could all relax and explore more. We started heading towards the back when the meowing started again. And this time, it legit just sounded like a person meowing. I remember Stacy staying back a bit while I entered the room, followed by Andre. It was another classroom, but appeared to be for younger children, like a nursery. And in one corner, there were maybe 6 or 7 cribs stacked on each other to make like a sectioned off room. Of course, that would be where the sound was coming from too. As we walked in further, we turned our flashlight to point it into the corner. And that's when we saw it. We saw a full-grown man crouching naked in front of us. Embarrassed, Andre and I turned around and I apologized for intruding. And as I was about to say that we would leave, The dude started barking at us. Stacy was asking us from the doorway what was happening when Andre started laughing and shouting about a crazy guy living here. As we started walking back, and while Andre continued to poke fun at the guy, his barks became louder and more aggressive. I told them that it was best that we just leave when Andre yelled, "Hey, look out!" And before I could register what he said, this guy has jumped on me and he was scratching at my back. I tried to turn over, but this guy had to be at least 200 pounds, so it was a struggle. Thankfully, Andre ran over and punched the guy in the head, which caused him to stumble back a bit, enough for him to help me up. I stood there for a second looking at the sky as I tried to gain my composure back, when he proceeded to crouch on his hands and feet and then growl at us. Stacy started yelling at us that we just needed to leave, so we started walking quickly away when I looked back to see the guy walk out of the room, still on all fours. He started kicking back his legs and Andre shouted, "Oh, hell no!" And the guy started running for us. I have never seen a human run so fast on his hands and feet. It was terrifying. We got to the stairs, got to the bottom, and I jumped from the second to the last stair or something like that, and my foot went through the floor. So once again, I am falling to the floor with both of them yelling at me, and the guy was closing in. I remember Andre yelling at Stacy to pry open the door, and he helped me up again. And right as we got to the door, the dude had fallen from the top of the stairs to the bottom. I kid you not, it was like he just fell over the side and landed in front of us, nearly scaring the hell out of me. But he looked like he knocked himself unconscious. I stared at him for a second to see if he was still breathing at least. The guy was just skin and bones. I could see his spine clinging to his skin, and his arms and legs looked frail and thin. You could even see his cheekbones nearly protruding in his face. He was terrifying looking. Stacy yelled at us, so we made our way to the door. We got out and made sure that we didn't lose anything too important and weren't hurt, and we started making our way to the fence. As we were climbing over it, we saw the man again. This time, he was standing on the school entrance by the door, just staring at us. He wasn't moving or barking, still on all four, but just watching. We didn't waste any time after that though. We ran to the car, got in, and locked the doors immediately. We looked up and the guy was now howling. We went to grab our phone to take a picture, but the guy quickly ran back inside, and we never saw him again. So yeah, that scared the hell out of us for the night. We went back to our place and had a few beers to try and calm down some and laugh it off. We were debating on if we should call the cops to get this guy help or if we would be worse off for trespassing. Andre thought that it was probably someone really messed up on drugs and found a place to call home, but it was just terrifying. It hasn't stopped us from our adventures, but we did add that to our rules, that if we find weird people, we leave ASAP. I am trying to convince them to go back there with me next summer so we can see if the guy is still there and maybe get some pictures for proof. So, did we run into a really messed up guy? Or do you think there was something more to it? Back in the early 90s, when I was about 10 years old, I had a really creepy close encounter with someone that honestly could have ended a lot worse than it did. And if I had been a bit more gullible, it likely would have ended really badly. At that time, I honestly did not comprehend the potential danger of the situation. But as I've gotten older, it clicked pretty hard how unsettling this experience really was. As mentioned, this was back when I was about 10 years old. My parents both worked during the day, and most days when I got home from school, I would be in an empty house for hours until my mom was able to leave work and then get home. They trusted me to be responsible enough to take care of myself. I was the type of kid that liked to just spend time in my room, playing my Super Nintendo, instead of being a problem for other people. We also lived in a neighborhood that was pretty much just a bunch of old people, so it was relatively safe. So honestly, it never seemed like a big deal to me. On this day, I had been home for maybe half an hour. I'd finished my homework and I had turned on the TV to watch something. I had grabbed a Pop-Tart for a snack when I thought that I saw something outside of the living room window. It was a pretty big window and it faced to the west, so if you walked by it in the afternoon, it would cause a bit of a shadow into the room. I glanced over for a moment to see if I could see anything, and I saw a man, probably in his late 40s, as he looked older than my dad. He was slowly walking along the sidewalk in front of our house. He seemed to be studying the house, staring at the ground, the roof, almost like he was seriously trying to memorize how our house looked like. But then it got creepy. As I was watching this guy analyze the exterior of our home, I watched as he put his face up to the glass with his hand cupped around his eyes. He was absolutely looking into the window and trying to see if there was anyone in the house. And, of course, he saw me sitting on the couch, just staring at him. He smiled and waved, and then I watched as he walked over to the front door, put his hand on the doorknob, and tried to push open the door. Thankfully, my parents had told me to keep the door locked at all times, and I was pretty obsessive with doing so he wasn't able to get in. When he realized that he wasn't going to get the door open, he walked back to the window and started knocking. By this point, I was having a mini panic attack in my mind, screaming about how this was some weirdo trying to get into the house. But I kept trying to calm down and tell myself that he must have been a neighbor or something. He kept knocking on the window rapidly, just tapping on it with his knuckle for several moments. And then he started on the door, really, really hard. At this point, I had no idea what to do, so I walked into the kitchen near the front door and just stood there. Because I was so unsure of what to do, I just figured out that I could tell him that he got the wrong house and then to go away. I didn't open the door, obviously, but I did shout out to him saying, "Who are you and what do you want?" When I asked this, I could hear him laugh a bit and then say, "Could you open the door for me?" I said no and again asked who he was. He then said that he was a neighbor and that he wasn't going to hurt me. I may have only been 10, but I knew that this was a weird thing to say to a kid. You don't just tell a kid, "I'm not going to hurt you," unless you plan to hurt them. At least, not in this kind of scenario. I told him that if he was a neighbor, then he needed to come back later when my parents were home, which I now realize was a stupid thing to say, as this was me literally telling him that my parents weren't home. When I said this, he paused for a moment and then said, "Look, kid, I work with your mom. I'm a friend of hers. She'll vouch for me, so can you just, please, let me in?" Now, this was where things got a bit confusing for me. This man knew my mother's name specifically, and it's not a common name, so it wasn't like he could just guess a name and get it right. But I also knew my mother's co-workers. My mom worked at a hair salon, and she was one of the big names of the store, alongside my aunt, of course. They had about 5 employees that they worked with, and I knew all of them because I would always hang out there during the summer, and I loved all my mom's co-workers. And the thing is, all of her co-workers are either older women or younger ladies trying to break into the industry. This guy was neither of those. I mentioned that I didn't think that I could let him in and that he should come back later. At this point, he got pretty angry. He started banging on the door saying, "I know your mom. Her name is..." And then he says my mom's name. "You need to let me in right now." When he started getting aggressive, I ran over to the cordless phone and I hit the button to call the salon. When they answered, I told her who I was and told her that I needed to talk to my mom right away. I explained the whole situation to her, and she told me to hang up, go to the laundry room, and then lock the door, and then call the cops. She then said that she would be there in a few minutes. I did exactly what she said, so I ran to the laundry room and then I locked the door, and then I called 911, telling them that a guy was trying to break into my house. And after about 10 minutes, I heard my mom yelling my name, along with the voice of an officer, and I came out to see them standing at the door and looking at a pile of glass. Apparently, after I had run down to the laundry room, this guy had smashed the window in the front door and tried to break in. The officers took my statement, asking me a bunch of questions about the guy and what he looked like. I told them all that I could, and I told them that they knew my mom's name specifically, and they said that they would drive around to try and find the guy, but I have no idea if they ever caught them. My mom thanked them, and after all was said and done, she told me that I did everything right and kept telling me that it was all okay. I could tell that she was freaking out about it as bad as I was. And after that, I wasn't allowed to be at home alone for a few years. My mom worked with one of our neighbors, an older lady that was actually one of the lunch ladies at my school, and I stayed at her house until they got home every day until I was in high school. She was pretty cool though, and she always had food for me when I got there, so I didn't really mind. That day is something that has been burned in my mind, and when I was that age, I was definitely scared, but as I mentioned, I now realize how serious it actually was. I am thankful that, even at that age, I was smart enough to realize that this guy didn't want anything good. I have no idea how he knew my mom's name specifically. Maybe he looked at the mail or something. But I'm just glad that I trusted my instincts and that I was able to avoid a much worse fate. This story is mine, sort of, but it's more my dad's, so the entire thing is based on what he's told me. I was there, but I was just strapped to my little car seat in the back, and obviously, I was way too young to remember any of it. He told me about this way later in life, and honestly, it's terrifying. It's probably why my dad was always so protective of me and emphasized being alert and aware of our surroundings. Hell, when I turned 17 and got my license, he always told me to take the main road and avoid the back roads. From what my dad had told me, it was a pretty normal morning. He needed to go run some errands, so he was taking me to my grandma's house. I was just sitting in my car seat and then watching the back window as I always did, completely unaware of anything. He was driving down a relatively quiet road with trees on both sides. My grandma lived on the edge of a suburb, so there were a few spots that you had to go through that weren't heavily incorporated. He was there, just cruising at speed, when a man jumped out of the woods and then ran in front of my dad's car, flailing his arms wildly. Naturally, my dad slammed his brakes, barely avoiding hitting this guy. He said that he could see that this guy looked terrified, like he was running from something or someone. But something about it didn't seem right. Something about the situation was off. His instincts were screaming at him that this guy wasn't just some random dude running across the road. The guy didn't say anything to my dad. He just limped over to the side of the car and made the motion of rolling down the window. My dad, curious as to what this guy's explanation was, cracked the window and asked if he was okay. The man didn't respond. The two of them just stared at each other's eyes for several silent seconds. My dad said that his heart was pounding, like his mind was saying, "Nah, get out of here." He was prepared to drive off at the first sign of trouble, and sure enough, trouble arrived. As soon as he turned to look back at the road, out of the corner of his eye, he saw two other figures starting to emerge from the undergrowth of the woods on the other side, and without hesitation, my dad stomped on the gas and the car lurched forward, leaving the three strangers standing there in the middle of the dust cloud that he kicked up. He said that he could see them in the rear-view mirror, and all three of them just stood there watching as he drove off. He didn't stop driving until we reached my grandma's house, where he said that he called the cops to report the incident. He wasn't sure what they were planning, but he gave them a description of the man and the location too. But the details were sparse outside of that, so we never did find out what happened with the situation or what that all was. The police never called us back too with any details, and my dad didn't press the issue. He was just happy to have avoided what was undoubtedly heading towards a dangerous situation. And even today, years later, my dad sweats every time he tells the story, which really tells me how much it scared him. My dad is a good guy, and he will stop and help people on the side of the road. But this was definitely a sobering reminder that some people will take advantage of those willing to stop. So it's important to trust your instincts and be hyper-vigilant about your surroundings. And here's the riddle for this video. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate it. I would also like to give some extra love to my Patreon members, my channel members, and also my tippers. Thank you so much. If you would like to extend a little bit more support for the channel, don't forget to leave a like and a comment down below. If you would like to become a Patreon member, a channel member, a tipper, or even to buy merch, check out the links in the description below. Again, thank you. And I hope you stay scared, because your fear feeds me.